I want to tell you about a Friday morning in Brooklyn. Not the Brooklyn you might know today, with its coffee shops and its noise and its renovated storefronts. The Brooklyn of 1966. Eastern Parkway, where the kitchens were small, the windows faced the street, and everything in the morning smelled of soap and something frying somewhere nearby. I was 9 years old, maybe 10. The sun wasn't all the way up yet when I came downstairs in my pajamas and found Bubbe Leah already standing at the kitchen window. She was dressed for the day. She was always dressed before anyone else in the house. She believed, without ever saying so in so many words, that the day deserved to be met with some dignity. I watched her reach into the pocket of her apron and pull out a single coin. One coin. She held it for a moment, the way you hold something you want to remember holding. And then she dropped it into a small glass jar that sat on the windowsill between the wall and her small ceramic pepper grinder. The sound of it, the small clink against the glass. I can still hear it, sitting here 60 years later. It was not a dramatic sound. It was a quiet sound, the sound of something that happens every week, without ceremony. And it had a lid, I believe, that jar, but she never used it. The jar was always open, as if whatever was inside was not meant to be sealed, just held for a time on its way somewhere. I said, "Bubby, what's in the jar?" She said without turning from the window, "Tomorrow." I waited for more. There was no more. She picked up her dish towel and went back to whatever she had been doing before I walked in. With Bubbe Leah, you learned quickly that the second question was rarely the right one. She would tell you what she meant when she was ready. My friend, I've been a rabbi for 40 years. I've read more books about money than I care to admit. I've sat across the table from wealthy men and from people who had nothing, from young couples just starting out, and from old couples looking back at a long life. And I keep coming back to that jar. That scratched glass, cloudy from years of use, catching the morning light on a windowsill in Crown Heights. I keep thinking that my Bubbe Leah, who had no degree, no financial advisor, no spreadsheet, understood something about money that most of us spend our whole lives reaching for and never quite finding. Now that morning was a Friday, before the shopping, before the challah, before the soup, before a single Shabbat preparation had begun. The coin went in the jar first, not because Bubby had spare money lying around. In 1966, my grandfather had been gone 4 years, and she was living on very little. I knew this the way children know things. Not from being told, but from what was absent in that kitchen. From the way she portioned the soup, from the shoes she wore for 6 years without replacing them. She was not a woman of surplus. And still, every Friday morning, one coin, first. It took me 30 years to understand what she was doing. I want to be honest with you before we go any further. This is not a teaching that will change your finances in a week. I don't believe in those, and I don't think you do either. Not the part of you that has been around long enough to know better. What I want to give you tonight is smaller than that. One idea, just one. The difference between giving from what's left and giving first. It is a small distinction in action. It is a very large one in who you believe yourself to be. And when you hear where it comes from the book of Proverbs, from a word older than any financial advice you have ever read, I think it might land somewhere you weren't expecting. If this kind of teaching is for you tonight, leave a Shalom in the comments. It tells me you're there. Now, let me tell you a little story. The jar on Bubbe Leah's windowsill was not beautiful. I want to be clear about that. It was a pickle jar, I think. The glass a little cloudy from years of use. No label left on it. She had soaked it off long ago. It sat there quietly between the wall and the pepper grinder, and in the right morning light, it looked almost like it held something golden. It didn't. It held coins. And sometimes a folded bill, pressed in carefully so it didn't take up too much room. She never counted what was inside in front of anyone. I noticed that early. If I walked into the kitchen while she was adding to it, she didn't stop or cover the jar. But she didn't make a show of it either. It was the most private object in a kitchen that wasn't very private. 6 people in a small apartment. Privacy was not something any of us had much of. But that jar was hers alone. One Friday when I was maybe 11, I noticed the jar was nearly full. I asked her, "Bubby, are we rich now?" She laughed. Not unkindly, but the way someone laughs when a question has missed the point by quite a distance. "Not yet," she said. "And anyway, that's not what it's for." That same afternoon, before the sun went down, before the Shabbat candles, before the week officially ended, she took the jar down from the windowsill, wrapped what was inside in a cloth, and walked out of the apartment. She was gone maybe 20 minutes. She came home without the cloth, without the coins. She washed her hands. She came to the kitchen and started setting the table as if she had simply stepped out for air. I asked where she went. She said, "A few blocks." I asked to whom. She said, "A neighbor." That was all. By Sunday morning, there was 1 coin in the jar again. I thought about asking her again. I didn't. Some things you understand you are not supposed to rush. The jar kept its rhythm without my help. Years later, this was 1981, and Rivka and I had been married less than a year, and we had 1 small child and very little else. I told Rivka about the jar one evening. We were at our kitchen table in a small apartment not so different from the one I had grown up in. Money was tight that month. Not tight like an inconvenience. Tight like a worry you fall asleep carrying. Rivka listened to the whole story without interrupting. Then she got up, went to the cabinet under the sink, and found a glass jar we had been keeping for no particular reason. She rinsed it out. She put it on our windowsill. She didn't ask whether we could afford it. She just put the jar there. I fell in love with her a second time that night. I won't pretend otherwise. We kept that jar for many years. When the children were older and our giving became more organized, a proper envelope, a proper system, I missed the jar. There was something in the sound of the coin, the small weight of it leaving your hand, that the envelope never captured. The transfer is invisible. The jar is not. Last year, I put a jar back on my windowsill. Rivka saw it and said nothing. She just smiled the way she smiles when she thinks I've done something right, which, I'll be honest with you, is not always as often as I would like. And here is where the Torah opens its door for us. There is a beautiful teaching in the book of Proverbs, chapter 3, verse 9. It goes like this: honor the Lord with your wealth and with the reshape, with the first of all your increase. Reshape. That is the Hebrew word, and I want to stay with it for a moment. Reshape means first portion. Not what remains after everything else has been taken care of. Not the coins at the bottom of the pocket at the end of the week. The first, before you know what the rest of the month will look like. Now, I want to tell you where this idea was first lived out in Jewish history, because it is older than the book of Proverbs itself. It comes from the practice of bikurim, what we translate as the first fruits. When a farmer in ancient Israel saw the very first signs of a harvest, the first fig beginning to color on the branch, the first cluster of grapes forming on the vine, the first head of wheat rising in the field, he would tie a piece of ribbon around it. Right then, a marker. That fruit was set aside before it was even fully grown. It was designated from that moment for somewhere else. Offered, given, not the surplus, not the overstock at the end of the season. The very first sign of life in the crop. This is the image behind Proverbs 3:9. The word kavod, honor, in Hebrew, carries the weight of something given its proper place. To honor the Lord with your reshape is to say, I know what order things go in. The first portion was never entirely mine to decide with. There is a teaching in Pirkei Avot, our ancient collection of rabbinic wisdom, teachings passed from teacher to student across many centuries. In chapter 3, a saying I have carried with me for 30 years. It goes, give to him from what is his, for you and what you have are his. Give to him from what is his. This is not a poetic sentiment. It is a practical one. If what passes through my hands was never entirely mine to begin with, if I am, at the most honest level, a steward rather than an owner, then the question changes. The question is no longer, can I afford to give? The question becomes, how do I participate honestly in the passing of what I have been trusted with? There is also a passage in Deuteronomy chapter 15 verses 7 and 8 that belongs here. It says, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother. You shall open wide your hand to him. Open wide. The Torah is specific about the posture. Not a hand cracked slightly open. Not a hand open after the calculation is complete. Open wide. The posture precedes the decision. Bubbe Leah's jar was a physical practice of that open hand. Not a spreadsheet, not an annual resolution. A jar on a windowsill you walked past every morning that caught the light, that reminded your body of something your mind had already agreed to. The body needs objects. The mind can drift, can argue, can find its way to 100 small reasons why this week is not the right week. The jar doesn't argue. The jar is just there. I'll be honest with you, my friend. I understood Proverbs 3:9 in my head long before I understood it in my hands. I read it in seminary. I quoted it in sermons. And then I watched Bubbe Leah drop a coin into a jar on a Friday morning in 1966, and I understood it the way you understand something when it finally lands in your body instead of staying in your mind. She didn't know the chapter and verse. She knew the practice, and practice, the sages tell us, outlasts the lesson. Now I have to be honest with you, my friend. Most people read this, and they miss something gentle. The misunderstanding is not selfishness. I want to say that carefully, because the people I know who struggle with this are not selfish people. They are generous people, warm people, people who mean to give and intend to give. They just give from what's left. They pay the bills, they cover the groceries, they take care of the children, and then, if something is remaining at the end of the month, they give from that remainder. And I want to explain to you why this is not wrong in motive, but it is a mistake in practice. When you give from what's left, you are making a quiet assumption. You are assuming that what you earned this month is primarily yours, that you received it, managed it, covered all your needs with it, and are now distributing what remains as an act of generosity. The intention is good, but the frame is, I am the owner distributing surplus. When you give first, before the shopping, before the extras, before you know how tight the month will be, you are making a different quiet assumption. You are saying, the first portion was not entirely mine to decide with. I am moving it along. I am participating in something that was in motion before I arrived. This is a small difference in action. You are moving coins either way, but it is a very different understanding of what you are doing with your life and what you are made of. My Rabbi Mordecai of blessed memory, used to say that the order of our actions reveals the order of our beliefs. Not what we say we believe, not what we plan to do someday when things settle down. The order of what we do first on a Friday morning, that tells us who we actually think we are. Bubbe Leah put the coin in the jar before she put on her coat to go shopping. Not after. Before. She was not certain every week that the shopping money would stretch far enough. But the order mattered. The order was the theology. Now, I want to be careful here. Some of you listening tonight are in a genuinely tight month. I know that. I have been in those months myself, and I do not say this lightly. Torah does not require you to give what you do not have. The Rambam, Maimonides, wrote in his great legal code in the laws of giving to the poor that a person is not obligated to impoverish themselves to fulfill tzedakah. There is a floor in the law. There is mercy in the law. But, and this is the gentle correction, the amount is a separate question from the order. Even in a difficult month, there is usually one coin. The practice is not about the size. The practice is the order. Giving before you know what remains. That is the reshape. That is the first portion. I have sat with people over the years, good people, generous people, who told me they wanted to give more, but the time wasn't right. And sometimes that was entirely true, and I sat with them and we talked about other things. But more often, what I heard underneath those words was this: I will give when I feel secure, when I have enough. When the uncertainty passes, my friend, the uncertainty does not pass. That feeling of having enough to give freely, it is not a financial state. It is a spiritual one. And the jar, the coin, the Friday morning, that is how you build it. Not by waiting until you feel it, by practicing until it becomes the quiet shape of your week. So what do we do with this, you and I, on a Tuesday morning? I want to give you 3 things, not rules, not commands. 3 practices that Bubbe Leah, without ever knowing their names, kept for 50 years in a small Brooklyn kitchen. The first, find the jar. I mean that literally, not metaphorically. Not find your inner container of generosity, a jar, a small box, something physical that sits somewhere you walk past every day, a kitchen windowsill, a shelf near the door, a corner of the counter. It does not have to be beautiful. Bubby's wasn't. A former pickle jar, cloudy from years of use. It just has to be there, visible, in the ordinary geography of your week. And if you don't have a jar, use a small box. Use an envelope pinned to the inside of a cabinet door. Bubbe was not precious about the container. She was precise about the practice. The container is just the habit's address. It needs to exist somewhere your eyes go every morning. Here is why this matters, and it is not a spiritual reason. It is a physical one. Your body needs a cue. The mind can hold an intention for about 3 days before it gets busy, before it reasons its way out of things, before the habit quietly collapses. The jar doesn't reason. The jar is there every morning, in your line of sight, waiting. Your body walks past it and knows what the jar means. This is not magic. It is the same reason you put your shoes by the door if you want to walk in the morning. The object carries the intention when the intention gets tired. A bank transfer does this work invisibly, and there is nothing wrong with a bank transfer. But the jar does something a transfer cannot. The coin is in your hand before it is gone. You feel the small weight of it. You hear it land. That moment, the release, the sound, it happens in your body, not in your account. And that is where habits actually live. The second practice, make it first, not last. This is the harder one, and I want to be honest about that. Not first before rent, not first before feeding your children, but first before the first optional thing you spend money on this week. Before the coffee you buy on the way to work. Before the extra item you picked up because it was on sale. Before that. The amount is not the point. I want to say that again because it is the thing most likely to get lost. The amount is not the point. You can start with $1. You can start with less. The practice is the order. The practice is saying, with your hands before your mouth has a chance to argue, this portion moves first. You won't feel it at first. That is fine. Habits don't wait to be felt before they form. You drop the coin in the jar. You come back next Friday and drop another. At some point, and I cannot tell you exactly when because it is different for every person, the dropping begins to feel less like an obligation and more like something you were waiting all week to do. Like a small exhale. Like a door you open every Friday that reminds you what kind of person you are trying to become. The third practice, give it quietly. When the jar is full, or when the month arrives when you feel it is time, bring it somewhere without making an announcement. The Rambam taught that anonymous giving stands higher than giving with your name attached. Not because your name is bad, but because when you give with your name, part of what you receive in return is the acknowledgement. When you give without your name, what you receive is quieter and harder to put into words. A sense, and I know this is not easy to describe, that you participated in something that did not need you to witness it. Bubbe never told us where the money went. Not the names, not the details. She said a neighbor and came home and washed her hands. I think that was entirely intentional. The moment she told the full story, the jar would have become about her. She didn't want it to be about her. It won't change your life in 24 hours. But practiced week after week, a coin first quietly, it might change the quiet shape of how you walk through a Friday morning. And that's better. After Bubbe Leah died in 1979, she was 78, 79. We were never entirely sure because the papers from her early life in Lithuania had been lost during the war and she had no great interest in recovering exact dates. I went with my mother to her apartment to begin the difficult and tender work of clearing her things. The jar was still on the windowsill, empty. Her neighbor mentioned it quietly during the Shiva. Bubbe had walked the jar to someone just the week before she passed. She said nothing to us about it. She just went, as she always went. A few blocks, a cloth, a neighbor whose name she kept to herself. Came home, washed her hands, set the table for Shabbat. I held that jar for a long time, standing at her kitchen window that afternoon. The light came through it the same way it always had. Cloudy glass, no label, a small crack near the base I had never noticed before. It was probably the most ordinary object in that kitchen. I don't know what happened to most of her belongings. I remember the jar. She spent 50 years filling it and emptying it and filling it again. Not 50 years of wealth. Not 50 years of comfort. 50 years of one coin first, every Friday, with the same quiet conviction that what she had was not entirely hers and that giving was not generosity so much as participation. That is the practice she gave me. Not the jar itself. We didn't keep her jar and I wouldn't have wanted to. What she gave me was the knowledge that this is something a person can actually do, not just aspire to, not just read about. A coin, a windowsill, a Friday morning. That is small enough to be real. Let me say this plainly, my dear one. That jar was the most valuable thing in her kitchen, not because of what it held, because of who she became. Week after week, coin after coin, walking 3 blocks and coming home and washing her hands, because of who she became by doing it for half a century. That is what Proverbs 3:9 sounds like when it lives in a person's body long enough. If someone came to mind while we were sitting here together, a friend, a daughter, a neighbor who is carrying something heavy right now about money or about meaning, send them this, not because it will solve anything quickly, because a word sometimes is what a person needs before they can find their way to the jar. May you walk in Shalom, dear neighbor.